an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Evolve, chapters 13 and 14. In these chapters, we touch base with Briar again and find out that things have not been great for him, and I'm not sure if he would have made a different choice looking back and knowing what he knows now. Also, fucking Elgen Spears has figured out what Jordan is and seems to think he has unlocked something, and I'm not excited about that at all. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Heather for commissioning this episode. I want to start this off by saying something that I feel is really stupid of me, but I'm going to be honest. I know everything that's been going on with Dr. Spears has been about him unlocking a way to awaken the average human. And yet, I didn't expect him to succeed at it. And when I say I feel really stupid, I mean, why introduce that as a plot point if you're not going to eventually figure out a way? Like, I think what I expected was that he wouldn't unlock an actual answer in the way that he wanted, that he would find a way to produce results that were like being awakened, but not truly awakened, and that he would have to settle for that. Like it would be a sort of bastardization, or perhaps something like even like a cyborg sort of thing where it's a combination of a biological and mechanical function that he would give people to sort of, but the idea that he would just hit on the formula and get it right straight up did not occur to me. And I feel really stupid for that because of course that has to happen. Like, we're dealing with bad dudes here. Bad dudes being able to create more of people on their own side, perhaps on their side. Like, it all depends, right? How you set this up and who you choose to give these abilities. But I just feel really dumb for not like seeing this coming. And even if I had thought he was going to eventually succeed, I don't think I would have expected it like halfway through the second book. I think I would have expected that to happen somewhere in the third book. Like that would begin the major conflict, I would think. And this still may be the start of building an army for the major conflict in the third book. But I just wasn't really thinking ahead like that. Of course, if you're going to do something like this, you would need time to formulate these people, So that really caught me off guard. It remains to be seen, of course, whether or not he's correct. He is so certain he's correct that he is willing to open a bottle of booze that he's been holding on to for thousands of years. So I feel like that sounds like he's pretty sure. But who knows? He may be wrong. Whatever, we'll see. But I'm going to start back at the beginning again. So chapter 13 has a great opening line. Any doubt that he was in the deepest shit of his life had long fled Briar Young. Oh, Briar. I am all about this, though, because, of course, I hate this motherfucker. Like, he sucks. He's awful. And so, for me, finding out that teaming up with this guy hasn't resulted in anything like good treatment for him is wonderful to me. Because I sort of thought it might, like, of course, Arcady is antagonistic towards him and suspicious of him and everything. But I wasn't sure exactly how that was going to manifest once they began their missions, or Arcadie's mission, really. And it turns out, it says, the Russian was true to his word and had kept a watchful eye on Breyer the entire time, making sure to reinforce his position as the man in charge with threats of violence and painful dismemberment for any attempted escape. Add the nearly non-stop 7-day ride in the trunk of Arcadie's Beamer into the mix, and it was a trip from hell. And Arcadie is saying, well, you know, you're supposed to be dead. And Breyer is like, yeah, that's not why you're doing this. You just like fucking with me, which I am positive is correct. Arcadie, like, nobody's going to see Breyer sitting in the front seat of a car and be like, isn't that guy supposed to be dead? That's not happening. Of course, that's like, it's just a sadistic thing that he's enjoying fucking with him. And I'm not mad at that, because fuck that guy. Good. Anything else you can do? Anything else you want to throw on that pile? Because I'm fine with it. I will say, though, at this point I was like, non-stop, huh? And I wondered, does that mean that Arcadie isn't sleeping? And as we find out later when we return to his POV, because right now we're in Breyer's, and we come back into Arcadie's POV when he is in the middle of his mission. He's in the water with his brethren. And we find out that he hasn't slept in 2 weeks, and it's starting to affect him. And this is a smart move, because it's understandable why he hasn't slept in 2 weeks. But also the fact that it's starting to affect him gives a realistic reason why he may fail on this mission. He may get injured on this mission. Any number of things, possibilities for the plot, are opened up by acknowledging that he isn't at his best right now. So that not only means that he could fail, which makes it more interesting to read, it means that if he were to fail, his brethren aren't necessarily going to follow him in that. Like, they could possibly take him down or capture him and not them. And that, for some reason, adds some interest to me, the idea of splitting them up. And as we find out later, when he's talked to them about doing this mission in the first place, they're not all super enthusiastic about this. There's like a couple of them that don't want to do it at all because they think it's like an impossible suicide mission. And he says something about how he didn't want to have to make an example of them, but sometimes you had to. And I'm like, not sure if that means that he killed them or that he just like beat the shit out of them. But, you know, I mean, it doesn't really matter in the end to me, the reader. I am just wondering, did he sacrifice some of his own people to make a point here? And I would be a little bit surprised if he did that. But the thing is, like, these guys can take such a beating that would beating them up or doing something like that even really be sending a message? They just don't really seem to, like, sustain the kind of damage you would need for physical violence short of death to make an impression. But maybe I'm wrong in that. I don't know. Anyway, back to Breyer. So he is watching Arcadie questioning, or no, they haven't got him yet. They're waiting in the house for Kent. And this is extremely nerve-wracking because we know what happened at Stevens's house. The sobbing retelling provided by Stevens's wife had been particularly chilling. At least this fucker hasn't broken anything yet. I'm like, yet being the operative word, because that seems pretty par for these guys. That's like their go-to, I would assume. And Breyer is thinking to himself about how quickly Arcadie was able to zero in on where this guy lived, the models of cars that he drives, everything about the type of information he has and how quickly he got access to it is, you know, just pointing to what excellent resources these dudes have, which is very intimidating. And it's to a point even that, like, talk about getting advanced information. Young is like sitting there being told Kent's going to be pulling in a couple minutes. And he's like, are you sure? Because I don't hear anything. And it turns out he's correct. He just has much more heightened hearing than Briar does. So this dude comes into the house and Arcady grabs him up and throws him into the wall a couple times. This fight scene is pretty well written. It's hard a lot to keep track mentally of where people are in a fight scene, and I felt like I was able to picture what was going on here pretty well. And this bit where he gets Arcady's nose and his blood is dripping down his suit. I am sure that Arcady has this moment of rage due to having been hit, but all I could think was that this was a reaction to his suit getting stained, and I found that much more funny. So, as soon as the large Russian had a sense of Kent's speed, he stopped countering the other man's strikes and went on the offensive. In moments, Kent had taken a dozen punches meant to wear him down rather than cause permanent injury, and he was gasping for breath. The older man staggered back after a particularly nasty hit to his kidneys and dropped his guard. So, he grabs him at this point, and Arcady just headbutts him and breaks his nose. And then, like, tosses him onto the couch and is like, okay, now we're going to talk. And it was really interesting here. This dude is straight up like, I'm not telling you jack shit. Go fuck yourself. And I'm sure he thought he meant that when he said it. I am one of those people who has no illusions about my tolerance for pain. I will tell you whatever, and you don't need to touch me. Just the fucking threat of it is enough. Thanks. It's fine. I will tell you all of it. Whatever. I just can't. Nope, not happening. Which is why I'm not in this line of work. But eventually this dude does crumble. Like, we find out that Arcady was able to get everything he needed. And I don't want to know particularly what he did to this dude to get that information, but we know he's not dead, which really surprised me. And even like Arcady is sort of not sure that was a great idea. But he thinks that maybe this dude is going to wind up being useful for something else later. So there's an oddness to that. When we get there, I'll read the exact line. But there's almost a sense that Arcady is rationalizing to himself why he kept the guy alive. And I found that it got my attention. So at this point, Arcady is threatening Kent's son. And there is this interesting moment. Young could tell Kent was trying to weigh his options, though at the mention of his son, the man couldn't hide the pained expression. Arcady sensed it too and smiled broadly. Yes, I know these things. Think you know everything, huh? My son was killed in an accident a week ago, so go to hell. I'm not helping you or that traitor do a bloody thing. I am really curious if he is telling the truth. I think he is. I think it's such an easy thing to double check. You know, I'm pretty sure he's telling the truth. But it would be a pretty smart move to act like, oh, you're going to kill my son. He's dead already. Fuck you. Like, that's actually not a bad idea. I don't think it would work. But I just couldn't quite tell if he was being honest here. And I love the fact that, like, he has this pained expression and Arcady is, like, all smug. And then it turns out it fucking has nothing to do with him. Take that, you dick. And he says, my death, my staff's deaths, it's nothing compared to the death you and your kind can cause. So go on then, do your worst, comrade. I won't tell you anything. And this is when he sort of calls Arcady's bluff, because he's like, oh, you can't kill me. You're threatening to kill me. But I might be the only person you can get a hold of who would even guaranteed have this information. So what else are you going to do? And Arcady transforms into his shark form at this point, which evidently is the first time that Briar has gotten to see this in person. And he says basically, like, you know, from his POV, I've seen it on video, and there is just no comparison to being in the room with something like this. How incredibly fucking terrifying it is. And I appreciated it being reiterated because I feel like as a reader, you can get so used to people having these powers that it just becomes rote and you forget what it's like. And like, imagine somebody close to 8 feet tall and like looking like part shark standing in a room with you. I would literally shit myself. Like, there is just no question. There is something about like seeing them on the street in a city. That would certainly still be scary, but there's a part of you when you see something out on the street that you're like, well, that's not real. You know, it's like you figure it's some sort of marketing thing or cosplay or whatever. You're in somebody's house in an ordinary like living room setting and you watched them turn into that in front of your face. Whole other energy. No, thank you. And he basically walks up to the general in this form and is like, okay, now I'm serious. And Briar is like, I'm going to get out of here. And walks out of there. Before Young could reach the room where they were holding Kent's household staff, an agonized cry reverberated through the house. The sound made Young's blood turn to ice. He glanced down the hall toward the living room and gave his head a little shake. Just give it up, you poor bugger. Briar, I really hate you. I really hope he dies a miserable, terrible death. I would ideally like for him to like wind up paralyzed somehow and have to experience what he has obviously inflicted on other women. Not necessarily like rape, I'm not saying, but you know, just that helplessness. I would be very happy to see him have to go through that, but I would settle for him being burned alive from the inside by Aftermath. That would also be acceptable. Just my top 2 theories, or not even theories, but just like my wish list. So this is when we go back to Elgen Spears. And this is there's a combination of like some interesting things happening here. First of all, there's a, mention of the absolute focus that he's able to maintain as part of the way he was bred in the Genagir. Like, they have castes and people are bred and built and educated according to what their purpose is supposed to be in that society. So he was educated and bred to be extremely focused. And this is the kind of thing that makes me sometimes wonder whether or not perhaps I am a little bit on the spectrum, or maybe I have some ADD or something, because I can focus to a point that isn't, it's sort of like a little bit frightening sometimes when I come out of it. I was just relating to this really hard. I'm like, a lot of people go through this too. And that's part of why I'm wondering, like, oh, maybe this is a sign of something else going on with me. But I have had multiple times I'm reading and somebody will be sitting literally right next to me, talking to me. And I genuinely do not register they're talking to me. It's like the sound got turned off, and I'm not saying this happens all the time. It's something that I will fall into when I'm really compelled by a thing. But when it does happen, it's so odd and disorienting, because I wish sometimes that I could access that kind of focus at will, but it seems to occur like at random. Similarly, like just disappearing into a project or a job, and then I come out of it and I realize it's been 6 hours. I'm starving. I'm angry because I'm starving and just in a bad mood. And I did not notice that time passing at all. So he is looking through the samples and everything, and asks Jenna if she has started processing Jordan's sample. And he asks her to bring up Jordan's profile in the meantime, because she hasn't gotten to that sample yet. And he sees her photo. It's a combo, a photo from the event that they were at, and he's like thinking about her, and a photo of her like ID. And I was actually surprised by this, because we have been in his head before, but he hasn't been thinking about Jordan necessarily super specifically up until this point. And so his conversation with Brian that we were just in the last section, I thought for some reason that he was just goading Brian. I didn't realize that he like meant it about wanting to fuck Jordan. He was dead ass serious. And I just thought that it was him trying to fuck with Brian a little bit and throw him off his footing, so that it would be easier to like get information out of him, because his guard would be down, because his irritation would get the better of him a little bit. And it turns out like Elgen genuinely is going to try and seduce her, even though he said, and there's a whole thing later, which is great. But yeah, for some reason, I just didn't actually think this was a genuine interest that he had. And I don't know how I feel about it now that I know it is genuine. Like, I'm not mad about it, but it does feel like Tretiak was like trying to have her in a similar way. And I mean, I guess this is just like something that would come with the territory with being an incredibly like gifted, but also beautiful woman. So I suppose it makes sense, but it feels like we're going back to the same well a little bit on that. But, you know, it may just go in a totally different direction, so it might be fine. And this is the moment where Jenna is sort of like weird with him, as he says like, oh, isn't she lovely? And Jenna is apparently she's developed a crush on him and has a sort of jealousy about his attraction to Jordan. And when he asks her opinion, she says, would you like me to provide a physical characteristic analysis against the human ideal example of beauty? And this is one of those things that I find fascinating, because we have like, there are people out there who have allegedly made like models of what the perfect human face looks like if you were to make like somebody with the golden ratio in every feature. And I will look at those models and just be like, I guess like that they look fine. It's not impressive, because the distinction of character in people's faces is, in my opinion, what makes them attractive or not. So having perfect features, it's pretty rare for that to be enough, you know, and that is essentially what he says here. Beauty is not just a set of parameters. There are intangible qualities that either enhance or diminish it. And even though she's jealous, Jenna can't help but be like, what does that mean? And he asks her to pull up her Jordan's sister Ryan's profile as well, and asks her to analyze them side by side. And he, you know, the answers that she gives are sort of surface, you know, as they would be. There's only like a certain kind of analysis that she can do, really. And They have a different gait. Even though both are effectively identical in height, there is considerable difference in the length of their strides. Jordan Law always maintains balance and appears to be mindful of the terrain's surface texture. I have to admit the sample size to compare the two subjects is very limited. And this is when he's like, okay, so taking that information, you want to like look at that data and think about what that indicates about their actual personality. And let's see, notice how each woman displays dexterity and poise. To you, that suggests exceptional agility and reflexes. However, there are nuances that are important. See how Ryan moves with more caution and less intent? She's sure-footed, but she gives way to others. Look at Jordan. She crosses the room, but others give way to her. Neither woman is attempting to physically push their way through the crowd, yet the crowd reacts differently. Why do you suppose that is? There is an intangible that the other humans are reacting to on an instinctual level. And basically at this point, Jenna's like, you have a particular reaction too. What's that about? And he's like, I want to fuck her. That's what that's about. She's intense, commanding, but also beautiful and graceful. And difficult to obtain, Jenna's disembodied voice added. And this is when it gets interesting. He says, I promised her husband that I would leave her alone. You do not keep your promises consistently, Jenna replied in a flat tone of voice as if it were a statistical fact. Spears was taken aback. Floored was perhaps the best description. Explain. The AI's voice remained analytical. Statistically, you alter the nature of your agreements 53.6% of the time. Usually, these alterations do not favor the party you are in agreement with. I predict that you will attempt to seduce Jordan Law at your earliest convenience despite your promise to her husband. What do you estimate my chances are of success? And she tries to be like, I couldn't tell you that. And he's like, yeah, you can. Silence reigned for several breaths. You will fail, Jenna pronounced. There was a certainty to her words that sparked anger anew in her master. Is this the best? I love this. He has made this creature, this AI. It understandably develops a crush on its own creator, the one being that knows it and is in control of it. And he cannot get enough of that. It feeds into his ego beautifully. But then it is actually observing him accurately without the taint of its crush softening his actions the way it would for a human being. You know, when you like somebody, you try to explain away the behaviors that aren't super flattering in their personality or justify them to yourself, or, you know, sort of tell yourself that whomever came out the worse in an interaction maybe deserved it. And Jenna is analytical enough that she doesn't fall into that at all. She can just step back and look at the actual facts. And he is unprepared for that shit to blow back on him at all, which feels like a very human thing to do. It's funny because he's not human, but the kind of thing where you build a weapon not expecting it to turn on you necessarily. And I am extremely curious where this is going to go, because there's a part of me that sort of wonders if eventually somebody is going to be able to like win Jenna away from him. I don't know how deep her loyalty goes because I don't know what parameters there are for that. Like, I don't know exactly how much of that is simply the natural fact of him being the one person that she's consistently in contact with, and how much of it is something that he has programmed in, perhaps, or how much of it is due to where she is now in her evolution, being in line still with his ideals, and maybe she'll continue to evolve and her ideals will begin to change and she won't be on board with his shit anymore. But either way, I am very curious about this because, like, at the moment, when he finally, like, gets to a point where he really thinks that he has managed to isolate what's important in Jordan's genetic code, she straight up is like, do you want me to kill the rest of the patients? So right now, she has no problem with that shit. And I just really wonder if that is going to be how she is forever, or if there will be a point where she starts to think, I don't know, maybe this is fucked up, you know? Because that happens with people. I don't see why it wouldn't happen with her. We all have things that we look back on and we're like, how was I okay with that? Like, what? So he tells her, start analyzing her sample now, which that's his reaction to her being like so certain that he's going to fail, which I thought was sort of interesting. It's like the only way that he can reassert control of this situation is to give an order. And it's not just reasserting control over her, Jenna. It's reasserting control over Jordan as well, in a way. Like, just, you know, in a hypothetical mental sense. He has a sample and he's going to analyze it, and she doesn't know that he has it. So it's a way for him to dominate her, even though he was just told he'll fail at seduction. Makes sense, you know? So he is sitting there waiting for this to complete itself. And Lena comes in. And this is so funny because she is just like trying to flirt with him. She clearly like is wanting to have sex right now, but he's a little busy. And in the midst of their banter, the like lights flashing and alert sensors going off in this, like on the screen, get his attention and completely distract him. And she gets really irritated at the fact that he completely stops paying attention to her. It's like she's not even there, disappears. This moment I found so funny. She takes his credit card. I'm going to go buy myself a Bentley, Elgen. I still have your credit card in my purse. Yes, have fun. Perturbed, Lena sauntered from the room with her hips swaying rhythmically as she tried to recapture Spears' attention with promises of what could still be his. It was fruitless. The woman cast a brief backward glance as she passed through the door, her head shaking angrily when she realized Spears hadn't even spared her an iota of his attention. Been there. There is nothing as insulting as a dude who normally is at your beck and call suddenly not giving any shits. It's very, very annoying. So finally, after 4 minutes of waiting, it was his holy grail, his Ark of the Covenant. When the analysis finished, the red indicator flashed to show that Jordan's DNA was atypical. The green indicator came on next. She was awakened, though he gathered that much from Brian's evasive and poorly disguised responses. I appreciated that being mentioned because I couldn't tell whether Brian was convincing, and I didn't think he sounded convincing, even though I was in his head. And you know somebody's probably a bad liar if even when you're reading from their perspective, it doesn't seem like they are really pulling it off. Finally, the frame around the data flashed blue, indicating that her genes had all of the markers that Spears had identified in a full-blooded Incarna. He dropped into his chair, stunned. Jenna, draw the shades and show me her entire workup. So, this is when he gets up and begins to mess around with her code. And he says that she's a hybrid. And Jenna says, I would estimate she is 1/4 human or less. What? How? I genuinely expected at least half, if not like 30%, like 1/4 human. That's even like how... I mean, I thought her mom was human. I might be wrong about that. And I don't know how like our, you know, incarnate DNA might just not work like human DNA. Like I'm thinking if you have two people of different races and they have a child, that child is mixed race. Like they're 50-50, you know? But certain things can be more dominant. I don't know. Oh, Heather, Heather's in the chat. I'm sorry. I totally missed that you got here. Hi, Heather. Shauna is half Incarna. Oh, okay. I feel like that was mentioned at one point, but I forgot. Okay. So hours pass as he begins to like pull out the sequences that he needs. And then when he finally steps back and looks at it, it's just like, wow, this was right here. And it was so simple, but this was very smart. And she asks him if he wants her to begin synthesizing a test compound. And he doesn't answer her right away. This is when he walks over and pulls out this bottle of booze that he has been holding on to for thousands of years. And it's like this alcohol that is specific to his people. And it's made from a berry that like got basically, it was extinct outside of artificial like growing labs. It had to be synthetically grown. It was one of the few regrets the Genagir had in regard to their long and often indiscriminate practice of warfare. Drinking Yalf before a battle and after a victory was a tradition that had only been kept alive by the intelligence of the fourth caste technicians. It had been the technicians who had created the artificial oddvoral berries, and it had been those same technicians that created the very special hydroponic system that allowed the delicate berry to be resurrected. So, and we get this line that they are fed. You will never be more than you are, or less. It is in your code. Yet, within each structure, there are shining lights. The phrase was taught to all Genagir children. It was a chain to keep them from reaching beyond their station and to encourage them to excel at their own work, to accept that their role was to serve their betters and their people without complaint. Yeah, I could see how that could be very effective. To just be like, well, it's just impossible for you to get to this certain point. But within what you are allowed and capable of doing, you can really outshine others, perhaps. That's a very, like, smart approach, you know? Just, like, you're not exceptional necessarily, but you could be a standout within your peer group, which is, like, it feels a lot more accessible and possible and thus convincing, and somehow manages to keep people, like, I mean, that's part of the way that a lot of us are kept in line now, you know? So Jenna asks him again, because he hasn't answered this whole time. He's still looking at this bottle. And she's like, so do you want me to do that? And he says, yes, and I'll see to the work on the keystone treatment myself. This is when she asks, do you want me to terminate the remaining subjects? No, have Karen call Mr. Quaid. I'm going to give him a gift. Sedate all of the subjects and load them onto the trucks for transport. I'm really curious about this because originally when he says, I'm going to give him a gift, I was like, oh, is he going to awaken all of the subjects and hand them over to Quaid? But because he's just sedating them and handing them over, and he doesn't mention using this on them, you know, he doesn't have a synthesized thing yet, but he's already organizing their transport. I have to assume they're just being handed over in their current state, which, you know, Quaid, as far as I know, doesn't like eat people or anything. Like, why is this a present? What can he do with just ordinary sleepers, I guess, as he would call them? I don't know, and I don't really want to know, low-key. I don't, or perhaps he's organizing them for transport, going to make the thing, and then wherever they're being transported to, then they'll get injected with this. I don't know. But yeah, he has a sip of this drink, and the chapter ends with, "Get Senator Campbell on the phone. It's time for her to repay my generosity." And then we go to chapter 14. And 14 is all about the mission of Arkady and his guys trying to break out Tretyak. And this is the part where we find out that, like, oh, so here it is. Kent had impressed Arkady with his resolve, and in a rare display of generosity, he had decided to let the man and his staff live, at least temporarily. A few dollars to some old mob connections made certain that Kent and his people couldn't warn anyone, and he could use them later if needed. Arkady didn't know if his act of mercy was weakness or pragmatism, but now wasn't the time for reflection. So that was what I meant earlier, where I was like, I thought it was sort of interesting that Arkady is second-guessing his own motivations a little bit. Like, it's just, it points to a kind of softness, and I hesitate to even use that word. I mean, he has just seemed so coldly pragmatic up until this point that him, like, keeping someone alive because he was vaguely impressed with them is pretty surprising. And apparently it also surprises him. But people do shit that feels out of character sometimes, you know? So him and his guys, there's, I think, about a dozen of them. They are swimming up to this underwater prison, the Block. And he's thinking about the fact that he had to make examples of some in order to keep the men in line. They all owed the Crimson Shark a great debt. Ungrateful bastards. We are gods thanks to him, and they allow their weakness to contaminate the gift he has given us all. Honestly, I kind of side with him on that. Like, this dude gave you everything that you are, and you're just going to not do a damn thing? That does feel incredibly weak sauce to me. Like, not that I want to be on Arkady's side ever, because he's a monster, literally and figuratively, but honestly, that does ring a little bit fucked up to me. So, I don't know, maybe my priorities are all skewed. Heather says, it wasn't specifically mentioned, but she's in charge of this chamber that McIntyre's in, and Cassidy has known Ethan for centuries, so he's full-blooded Incarna. Yeah, I knew that he was. I just didn't realize her mom was half. I don't know if you watch The Expanse, but there's a character on the show called Amos. He's a textbook sociopath who doesn't really have a moral compass, and he tends to follow the lead of the person he thinks is best equipped to make good decisions. Arkady kind of reminds me of him that way. I could see that, where you're just sort of like, I don't really know, so if you say, then I guess I believe you because I don't trust my own judgment. So this like method of approach, it's so, like, honestly, I have to fault the Block and the organization. I don't know what we want to call the organization that is running things that Jordan is a part of. But if you know that the guy who you've captured can turn into a shark, and you know that he has an army of dudes out there whom you have not yet located or captured, who can also turn into sharks, perhaps keeping him in an underwater facility is not the best possible option you could have. It just feels like that was not well thought through. What we wind up seeing is that they're able to utilize the fact that they have this appearance and can swim erratically enough that they don't attract attention, so that they get close. And, you know, he's like being realistic and thinks to himself that he doesn't have any illusions about perhaps getting into this facility without being detected. He knows that they're going to know he's there. But I don't think he would have been able to even breach at all if they weren't so perfectly adapted for this exact kind of mission. And I just really think this was like, somebody needs to be written up for this. That's all I'm saying. So let's see. But they reached the rocky floor, but pushed on, ignoring the protests of their bodies as they tested the limits of their physiology. The dozen metamorphs began to spread out into a wide, staggered line. It was an attempt to look as natural as they could to anyone monitoring sensors inside the deep-sea prison, and Arcady hoped that the isolation would make those sensor operators disregard any anomalies on their screen. So there are drones, as it turns out. And he had been, like, very hopeful that wasn't going to be a thing. He's a little bit disappointed that it turns out they're smarter than he expected. And he has to figure out how he's going to deal with those. And what he winds up doing later is basically like swimming up to one and just destroying it and then grabbing it and smashing it into the other one. I really thought it was going to be a little bit more subtle than that. But he really, truly is banking on the fact that they will know he's there. So what the fuck ever. Using a series of hand gestures, Arcady signaled the Vodnik on either side of him to be ready for full speed ingress. He proceeded to remove the equipment he was carrying. A dry bag, combat harness, wrist computer, dive watch, and large machete-like combat knife were passed off to the man on his right. As he swam, his body elongated, arms became pectoral fins, and legs melded together to become a powerful tail which he used to propel himself toward the facility. I didn't realize before this that they could turn on into full-on sharks. I thought that they became shark-ish in a lot of ways. And that, you know, they could still swim amazingly well because their top half transformed into a shark. And I don't really know why I thought that. Like, I just did, you know? I just had like a sort of Victor Crumb idea in my head. And finding out that he can, not only does he transform into a shark, he is extremely big, even for a shark. I think he's said to be like 8 meters long. Something that I was like, what? How? 7.25 meters long. Yeah. The machine was roughly 3 meters long and made from some sort of black polymer. So that 7.25 meters, so a meter's like about 3 feet. So that's 25 feet. That's insane. How? That's too big. That's not fair. That's really not fair. I can't even picture that. Like, in the room I'm in, I'm pretty sure the wall I'm looking at is only maybe 12 feet long. So he's like twice the length of this entire room, which is just not fair. So the machine sped off quickly and took up station several meters away. Soon a second joined it. And we get, like, throughout this whole mission, him thinking about the information that he has gotten from Kent. And I should mention, one, that I appreciate not having to watch Kent get tortured. We just get the screaming that starts after Briar leaves the room, which I deeply appreciate, because watching people get tortured, guys, I can't handle it. I'm not built for that. And then, two, we have these moments where he's like, Kent had shared, or Kent had informed him, or due to Kent's information. But I was so worried as we were reading it, like, that he was just going to say, like, breaking his thumb had netted him the information that, and I was like, so glad that we don't ever actually hear any specifics about what was done to him. That is not to say that if those specifics are ever shared, I'll be mad about it or anything. But as of right now, I just don't want to think about it. I just don't, like, especially knowing that Kent's still alive. That in particular feels so cruel to me. He's acting like, oh, I was so generous. And I'm like, were you? Or does he just desperately want to die at this point? I wouldn't be surprised. So in seconds, another drone appeared. Arcady kicked his legs and shoved the first into the nose of the second so hard the snout of the second protruded from the side of the first. They floundered as the operators tried to get their bearings, and Arcady could sense a third and fourth machine coming this way. So at this point, he calls his guys in, and, you know, because of what they are, they get there so quickly. I kind of thought that he was going to have to deal with a little more than he expected on his own, but they turn up like immediately. And only 2 of the mercenaries fired the drum-fed rifles they carried, and small torpedoes, no larger than a cigar tube, rocketed toward the approaching machines. Tiny little cigar torpedoes. Again, this just doesn't really feel fair, does it? These guys have too much fucking, like, equipment, access to shit. I don't like it. So at this point, they attach this breaching tape. I'm curious about this. Heather is in the chat, says, the biggest naturally occurring white shark, nicknamed Deep Blue, is 6.1 meters long. Wow. That's still, like, just yikes. Heather, is this breaching tape based on anything, or is this just a pure invention? Because I found this fascinating. There was a blinding flash as the nanothermite detonated. Instead of a massive explosion, the chemical superheated to thousands of degrees and instantly liquefied the metal beneath it. The water around the hatch reached its boiling point in moments and created a massive cloud of churning, roiling bubbles. That is pretty cool. And Arcady just, like, swims on through the literally boiling water because he is just too impatient for any of this shit and doesn't want to waste any time. And there is something about, like, we have seen them deal with pain plenty, but swimming your entire whole ass through boiling water just hits different somehow. That was a moment where I was truly like, ooh, okay, Arcady is really badass. Like, I've known he's badass, but this moment, for some reason, that, like, hammered it home for me. Let's see. Picture with human for scale. Oh, I'm totally clicking on this. Forgive me, everybody who is not in the chat to see this. Oh, God. Oh, it's a picture of this huge shark with a diver, like a scuba diver, in the water next to it. I need to navigate away immediately. That just caused a complete panic reaction in me. Oh, I hated that. I just, like, I have swum with, like, bull sharks. I think they were bull sharks. I think that's what it was. I'm thinking about Honduras. And it was very nerve-wracking to me, and we were assured that they were docile. They were not gonna, come at us. And they truly they seem to have no interest in us whatsoever. But being out of your element in the most literal way possible, and there are multiple creatures for whom this is their home and how they operate, and you are floating just as a target, like helpless in the midst of their road, basically. It's like very humbling. It is a real moment of like, wow, I am not at the top of the food chain. Not really. Not really. So the status light on the airlock control panel went from flashing red to green because they're able to seal it again with this like cool patch thing. Water quickly drained from the room, and Arcady's men broke out a more conventional assortment of automatic shotguns and squad automatic weapons. So this is when we cut back to Ryan's house, and Jordan is here. Everybody is celebrating their successful mission. I maintain my fucking suspicion on this mission. I feel like it just went too well. I don't like it. But I might be all wrong about this. She has a moment here with this guy, Electo Hill. He comes over and he's super friendly to her in a way that's like not flirty, but just trying to be friendly in a genuine, like, come be part of the crew kind of thing. And even though she doesn't really want to do that right now, she's very appreciative of the gesture and clearly is sort of touched by it in a way that I liked. It made me feel like, you know, she's not cold. She's just private. They're different things. And also it comes out that like Jill totally spilled who her husband is. And Jordan is like, motherfucker. And I'm like, yeah, you're going to have a talk with her about that. So she has left a message for Brian. She had called, she didn't get a text back. She didn't get a call back. And she's not sure what to think. Like, he hasn't responded and she's getting a little bit antsy over it. And her gaze connects with Jason's and she flushes again. And she starts to walk out of there, runs into Douglas. There's a little bit of tension here. And she wants to know what the deal is with Aftermath and what he has done. And Douglas basically is like, I don't know why you're suddenly acting interested in motivations when you have been for years working in military and given missions with no additional intel or anything. And you did your job. You fucking obeyed orders without question. And now all of a sudden you're acting like you're entitled to a full fucking briefing. Why? This is the same shit. Stop acting like you get to ask questions. And honestly, this is what I've been saying, you know, like I was talking about this before, like how weird it was that she has all of this internal conflict when she was just out here taking people down because she was told to take them down and it didn't seem to bother her before. And this is apparently like the influence of Brian trying to get her to question why she does what she does a little bit more and ask, well, what makes you think this person deserves to die? She never really stopped to think about it before. She trusted the people who told her what to do. And that's a real dangerous place to be. So she walks away from him here. And, you know, they sort of leave it like he's a little irritated with her, but also he tries to soften it at the end with like, can you just please be like that with this? And she goes off to be by herself in what's sort of like a study kind of, and sits in this chair for like a half hour all by herself. And I am somebody who like, I'm an introverted extrovert, I think is what they call it. I can be great around people. Like, you know, I like to think that I am funny and the life of the party. But it's tiring and I need to have moments to myself to regroup. And so her like going off by herself, I really understood how she felt here. That she's like, I don't not want to be a part of things, but also right now I just need some time. So she's chilling out and then there is a knock on the door. And in comes Josh. And there's a little back and forth here that we don't need to get into. All we need to know is that he is about to take a step toward her. And later she says, if he tried to kiss me, I would have let him. And she is disgusted with herself, knowing that to be true. And I really admire that she's able to be honest with herself about that. A lot of people, the fact that he didn't actually do it and she didn't have to put herself to the test, they would lie to themselves and be like, nothing happened and it wouldn't have happened anyway. I wouldn't have let it happen. I really like that she doesn't fucking lie to herself and is like, I wanted that shit though. I really did. And just as he's like stops himself from stepping toward her. Brian shows up. I was not expecting this at all, and it was great. Drama. Brian fucking sees. He is no fool. I mean, we know he's already like somewhat jealous and he's trying to keep control of that, but it's definitely there. And there is a fucking like chemistry between her and Jason that everybody sees. So I do not doubt that it's fucking flying through the air when he steps in and he knows exactly what the fuck. To his credit, later on, he sort of is like, obviously we have spent too much time apart. And he doesn't exactly blame her for it, especially because the way that she reacts when she sees him is she's glad to see him. She says that. She lets him like put his arm around her and she doesn't try and pull away, and is like tries to be as affectionate in her body language as well as her tone of voice as she can to reassure him, I want you here, you know? So I think that goes a long way. He, of course, has this like moment when he shakes hands with Jason of just looking at him like, yeah, I know what the fuck is happening here, which I don't blame him for that at all. This man was definitely going to make a move on her, and he knows that she is definitely married. So that is the fucking attitude to take. I'm not mad. But what I thought was sort of funny is that, so she says, I'm sorry. He says, for what? Like, oh, who knows? That looked wrong. Apparently, we've spent too much time apart. We have 3 hours and 48 minutes. I've seen you inhale a box of takeaway in 10 minutes when you're hungry. Trust me, you're going to be hungry. So I'm not in trouble then? I didn't say that, but maybe we're both a little to blame for it, yeah? I don't know how to take that. Does he think he's been neglecting her? It doesn't feel like she thinks that. Or like he thought that when he was in his own head. Is he just trying desperately to be cool right now and not? Because that can be a thing. If you feel like somebody is so out of your league, which he definitely has that with her, you don't hold them to the same standard you would as somebody you think of as more of a peer. Maybe he just is like, you know, I recognize that your needs and the demands that you are going to make of me as a partner because of who you are and what you are going to be higher and are going to be different. But yeah, this is just like, I was genuinely surprised at him acting as if like he holds any responsibility here, because I don't see that. And then we go to, so the two of them clearly are going to fuck for like 4 straight hours. Then we go to the conversation with Jill. And basically what this boils down to is Jordan being like, okay, Jill, I need to know what the fuck is going on because I cannot handle myself around this guy. And Jill is like, yeah, no shit. And Jordan does not like the fact that she is that transparent. But like, to be fair, Jill that's her specialty, is like reading people's actual like chemical response to things. So she fucking knows. And she says that he has the same sort of thing going on neurologically. And like there's, you know, fireworks. So I am thinking that maybe he is also incarnate, and there is something about both of them being of this particular like species, for lack of a better word, that draws them toward one another in a way that is really chemical, like a pheromone thing that they aren't necessarily in control of. But it doesn't have to be that. Like I would be fine with there being a cut and dried explanation, but I'm also fine with that not being it at all. And it just being sort of this inexplicable attraction, because that happens. And I do appreciate too Jill being like, look, I know that you want to be better than someone who looks at someone other than their spouse. And I get that you hold yourself to that standard, but people, this happens, and you just can't be so hard on yourself. And you just really do think that you're better than most people. And maybe you're not. Maybe you have the same like flaws and weaknesses in some ways. And I was like, that's a good point. You know, there is a certain kind of arrogance to not expect yourself to fall for the same sorts of like, you know, pitfalls that other people do. Holding yourself to a higher standard than anyone else. There is an arrogance innate in that. And I am super guilty of it, by the way. I think a lot of people are. But yeah, this ends with basically her being like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't see anything particularly physical causing this, but yeah, that doesn't mean that there isn't one. I just don't see it. And Jordan being like, God damn it, because she really wanted an explanation, which I understand. So that is the end of that chapter. I have to wrap up. I'm a little over time here. But thank you, Heather, for hanging out and chat with me. But no thank you for sharing me that picture of the shark, because that was terrifying. And yeah, I'm really enjoying this. I'm really not sure where we're going either. So that's fun. Snagged a slot for the next ep 2-8. Oh shit, not until February. All right. Wow. I didn't even look to see, so I didn't realize there was that big a gap. Sorry. I get booked up fast. All right. Well, what can you do? Letting everybody know now. It'll be a bit of a wait. But until then, guys, appreciate you listening. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.